A green-eyed woman digs into the dry earth with her bare hands, trying to bury the last remnants of herself along with her son. Widowed by a cruel man, hated by the settlers, rejected by everyone, she thinks nothing more can burn her, until she feels a pair of black eyes watching her. He emerges from the shadows like an omen, an Apache marked by scars and legends, who should hate her for everything she represents. But he touches her as someone who already knows her pain. What begins as forbidden comfort soon transforms into a fierce passion, dangerous and impossible to control. Between kisses that burn like fire, ancestral secrets, and persecutions that hunt their souls, they will discover that loving the enemy can be more devastating than any war, and that sometimes it is fate itself that wants to see them burn. If intense and unexpected love stories like this touch your heart, subscribe to this channel and comment what you thought. Every day we post new plots that move and surprise. Discover now the romance that no one dared to live. The rain fell heavily on the red earth of Texas when Emily found her brother's body. It was dawn, and the heavy clouds hid the moon behind the eucalyptus trees surrounding Sunny Hill Ranch. She was kneeling in the mud, embracing Gabriel's bloodied chest, when she heard footsteps approaching on the dirt road. She didn't raise her eyes. She knew nothing else mattered. Her fingernails dirty with earth and blood, her knees wounded against the stones, the sobs that tore from her throat. Emily was, at that moment, the very image of despair. And yet, there was something about her that made him stop. Ryan Davidson, heir to one of the largest fortunes in Texas agribusiness, observed this woman, daughter of a foreman, an enemy by position, by everything she represented to his family's business, and felt a strange uneasiness run through his veins. Her wet blouse clung to her body, revealing curves he had noticed other times, always from afar, always with the heavy conscience of someone who knew he shouldn't be noticing. When she finally raised her face and looked at him for the first time with that forced intimacy of tragedy, her brown eyes, still cloudy with tears, hit him like a knife. She was beautiful in a wild way, but something in her posture, even broken before death, defied any attempt at condescending pity. He helped her carry Gabriel to her parents' house. There were no words at first, only the sound of rain hitting the banana leaves, the smell of soaked earth, the slight brushing of arms when they shared the weight of the body. She didn't back away when his hand touched hers. But when they placed Gabriel on the simple kitchen table, when everything was finally done, her breathing collapsed into a moan more animal than human, and it was then that he knelt beside her, placing a large hand on her trembling shoulder, like someone who recognizes in another the same pain they carry hidden. That dawn, he didn't leave her alone. Ryan stayed on the porch of the small house, sitting in a white plastic chair, while she kept vigil for her brother inside. Every now and then, he heard her muffled sobs mixed with her mother's whispered prayers. He knew his presence there was inappropriate. A Davidson didn't keep vigil for a ranch hand, didn't mix with country people, didn't risk the family's reputation over a matter of conscience. But something new throbbed inside him every time he heard Emily's hoarse voice calling her brother's name. His curiosity about this woman, a force of nature he had been observing for months working in the plantations, always with her head held high, always talking back when other foremen provoked her, was beginning to overcome any sense of social convenience. When the day dawned gray, she appeared on the porch with 2 cups of black coffee, her eyes red but no longer lost. She sat down beside him without ceremony, and for the first time since they had known each other, they really talked. She spoke about Gabriel, about how he dreamed of buying his own piece of land, about how he worked double shifts to save money and get out of being an employee. He listened in silence, noticing how her voice had a musical cadence, how her gestures were firm even in sadness, how there was a sharp intelligence behind those eyes that life in the countryside had not managed to dull. And she was studying him differently now, too. Ryan wasn't the arrogant boss she had imagined. There was a melancholy in his silences, a loneliness that showed through when he thought no one was looking. The broad shoulders, the calloused hands, because, contrary to what she thought, he also worked the land, also understood the weight of carrying a ranch on his back, and especially those dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets that even he didn't fully understand. Something was growing there, something dangerous and inevitable. The days following the funeral were strange for both of them. Ryan began to appear in the sector where she worked more frequently than would be normal, always inventing some excuse about checking the plantation or talking to the foreman. Emily noticed him arriving even before seeing him. She felt his presence like feeling a storm approaching, a change in air pressure that made her entire body alert. They talked little, but there was an electric tension in every exchange of glances, in every murmured, "Good morning." In every moment their hands brushed when he handed her some tool or document. The first crack in the facade of social convenience happened on a suffocatingly hot afternoon, when she fainted in the middle of the soybean plantation. The sun was relentless, and Emily had been working since before dawn without stopping to eat properly. Grief had stolen her appetite, but not her determination to keep her job at any cost. Ryan found her unconscious among the soybean plants, her pale face covered in sweat, and carried her in his arms to the shade of a nearby tree. When she woke up, she was lying on his shirt, which had been transformed into a kind of improvised pillow. Ryan's bare torso, tanned by the sun and marked by some old scars, was just inches from her face. She should have gotten up immediately, should have formally thanked him and returned to work. Instead, she lay there a few seconds longer, observing the genuine concern in his eyes, feeling the heat radiating from his skin, noticing how her own hands trembled with the desire to touch those muscles defined by physical work. "You need to eat something," he said, his voice hoarser than normal. "And drink water. You can't go on like this." "I'm fine," she lied, but didn't move to get up. "You're not, and I'm not going to let you work yourself to death out of pride." There was something new in the way he spoke, an authority that had nothing to do with social position and everything to do with a man genuinely concerned about a woman. Emily felt a shiver run up her spine, despite the midday heat. He took her to the ranch house, to the kitchen of the main house where she had never before set foot. It was an immense room, with modern appliances and a solid wood table that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. But Ryan moved around with ease, preparing a sandwich and serving a large glass of cold passion fruit juice, as if it were the most normal thing in the world for a Davidson to personally serve an employee. "Your family won't like seeing me here," said Emily, but accepted the food. "My family isn't here," he replied, sitting in the chair next to her. "And even if they were, I'm a grown man. I can bring whoever I want into my house." The possessive way he said "my house" made something stir in her lower abdomen. Emily bit into the sandwich and tried to ignore how intimate it was to be there. Just the two of them, how he watched her eat with an intensity that set her nerves on fire. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. Ryan took a while to answer, his eyes fixed on her hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost a whisper. "Because since the first day you set foot on this ranch, I haven't been able to think about anything else." The sandwich stopped halfway to her mouth. The passion fruit juice ran down her throat, but she hardly noticed. There was a confession in those words, a vulnerability she would never have expected from a man like him. "This is crazy," she murmured. "It is," he agreed, but didn't look away. "But it's true." The tension in the air became almost palpable. Emily could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see how his hands contracted on the table as if he were holding himself back from touching her. Her own breathing had become faster, more shallow, and a part of her, a dangerous part that she had been trying to ignore for weeks, wanted to know what would happen if she didn't back away this time. The sound of tires on the dirt road violently brought them back to reality. Ryan jumped up, moving to the window, and his expression immediately hardened. "Damn, it's my father." Emily felt the blood freeze in her veins. Colonel Davidson was a legend, in the worst sense of the word. A man who had built his empire by stepping on whoever was necessary, who treated employees like disposable pieces, and who would never forgive a son getting involved with inferior people. She got up quickly, almost knocking over the chair. "I need to leave. Now." "Wait." Ryan grabbed her arm, but she pulled away. "You don't understand. If he sees me here, inside the house, I'll lose my job. And it's not just that. He can do worse things." Ryan knew she was right. He knew his father too well to doubt how far he would go to protect the family's reputation. But seeing her leave that way, in fear, with that hunted animal look, awakened something wild inside him. "Through the back door," he said quickly. "Go around the house on the left side and go straight to the plantation. I'll find a way to distract him." She ran. Not through the back door, not around the house. She ran right through the front door and Colonel Davidson saw her. He perfectly saw a young, beautiful woman in simple clothes, dirty with earth, leaving his house as if she had some right to be there. Emily felt the man's icy gaze fixed on her back as she walked as naturally as possible toward the plantation, but she knew it was too late. The damage was done. That night, when she returned home, she found her mother waiting in the kitchen with an expression she hadn't seen since childhood, a mixture of disappointment and fear that cut deeper than any scolding. "Emily, what did you do?" "Nothing, Mom. I didn't do anything. The foreman was here. He said you were seen leaving the main house today. Said the colonel wants to talk to you early tomorrow." Emily sat heavily in the chair, knowing her life had definitely changed in that moment. And the change hadn't been by her choice. Something had begun that neither of them knew how to end, and now, wanting it or not, they were going to discover how far a forbidden passion can drag two people when the whole world conspires to separate them. Colonel Davidson's office smelled of leather and cigar smoke, a heavy aroma that permeated the dark wood walls and dusty books. Emily was standing in front of the huge desk, her hands clasped in front of her body, trying to control the tremor that insisted on taking over her fingers. From the other side, the most powerful man in the region studied her with eyes cold as ice, calculating like those of a snake about to strike. "Sit down," he ordered, without removing the cigar from his mouth. She obeyed, choosing a leather chair that seemed to swallow her whole. The colonel was a large man, with broad shoulders and gray hair combed back, with deep wrinkles around his eyes that spoke of decades of building an empire without caring who he stepped on along the way. There were photos on the walls, him shaking hands with politicians, at plant inaugurations, receiving awards from rural associations. A man accustomed to getting what he wanted. 23 years working on this ranch, he finally said, leafing through a folder on the desk. "Your father, John Sanders, started here as a ranch hand, rose to foreman, never gave me problems. A straight man, hard-working, who knows his place. Your mother, Mrs. Cecilia, worked in the main house for 15 years, until she retired. Good people, trustworthy people." Emily said nothing. She knew it wasn't her turn to speak yet. "You grew up here. I saw you playing in the yard when you were a girl. Saw when you started working at 16. Saw when your brother Gabriel—" He made a calculated pause, observing her reaction to the name. "Sad thing. What happened to Gabriel? Hard-working boy, with a future. A loss for all of us." Emily's nails dug into her palms. The colonel was playing with her, like a cat plays with a mouse before killing it. "But you, Emily, you worry me." Now she raised her eyes, meeting his gaze for the first time since entering the room. "Why, sir?" "Because you don't know your place." The words fell in the air like lead. The colonel leaned back in his chair, blowing cigar smoke in her direction, and Emily felt as if the ceiling was collapsing on her head. "Yesterday you were in my house, in the kitchen of my house, eating at my table, and it wasn't the first time I noticed you and my son, talking more than would be appropriate." Her heart raced, but she forced herself to keep a neutral expression. "I fainted in the field, sir. Your son was just helping me. There was nothing inappropriate." "Nothing inappropriate," he repeated, imitating her tone of voice with sarcasm. Of course there wasn't. A Davidson carrying an employee in his arms, feeding her, being alone with her in an empty house. All very innocent. Emily felt the blood rise to her face. How did he know so many details? Someone had seen them. Someone had told him everything. "Ryan is a good boy," the colonel continued, rising and beginning to walk around the desk. "But he's young, impressionable. And you're exactly the type of woman who can make a man lose his head. Beautiful, with that victim air that awakens protective instincts. Smart enough to know exactly what you're doing." "I'm not doing anything, sir." "Lie," he said, stopping behind her chair. Emily could feel his presence, threatening like a shadow. "You're seducing my son, deliberately." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" His voice descended to a dangerous whisper. "Then explain to me why, every time I appear in some sector of the ranch, you're there. Why my son, who never took an interest in operational details, is suddenly visiting the plantations every day. Why you, who were always an exemplary employee, are suddenly fainting in the middle of work, creating situations that require rescue." Each word was a stab. The colonel had mapped everything, analyzed every encounter, every look, every gesture as if it were a military operation. "I'll be clear with you, Emily. My son is going to marry Hannah Morgan in December, daughter of the owner of the largest soybean processors in the state. It's a marriage that will consolidate the family business for generations. It's a future that cannot be threatened by a temporary distraction." Hannah Morgan. Emily knew the name, of course. Everyone in the region knew. A girl from a traditional family, educated in private schools in New York, with a degree in business administration, possessing a cold and sophisticated beauty that appeared in the social pages of local newspapers. The type of woman who was born to marry a Davidson. "I understand, sir," said Emily, her voice coming out weaker than she would have liked. "You understand? Great. Then there will be no problems when I tell you that you're being transferred to the Dallas headquarters. Same position, same salary, but far away from here. The move happens next week." The world stopped. Dallas was almost 200 miles from there. It meant leaving her parents, leaving everything she knew, leaving Ryan without even a proper chance to say goodbye. "I can't," she said, standing up abruptly. "My parents are old, they need me. And after Gabriel's death, your parents will manage. And as for Gabriel," he took a long drag on his cigar, "maybe it's time to tell you a truth you don't know yet." Emily felt her blood freeze. "What truth?" "Your brother didn't die in a work accident, as everyone thinks. He died because he was meddling where he shouldn't, asking questions about things that weren't his business, investigating certain irregularities in land lease contracts." The floor seemed to be moving under her feet. Gabriel had mentioned some suspicions in the last weeks before his death, talked about strange documents, about lands that had been taken from small producers through questionable debts. She had thought they were just theories, paranoia from someone who dreamed too much of having his own land. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that accidents happen when overly curious people decide to stick their noses where they shouldn't. And I'm saying that it would be a shame if other members of the Sanders family developed the same excessive curiosity." The threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. Emily understood perfectly. If she didn't get away from Ryan, if she didn't accept the transfer, bad things could happen. To her, to her parents, to anyone who dared to challenge the power of the Davidsons. "I accept the transfer," she said, her voice barely audible. "Excellent," smiled the colonel, returning behind the desk. "I knew you were a smart girl. Your parents must be proud." Emily walked to the door, her legs shaky, her head spinning. When she already had her hand on the doorknob, he spoke again. "Oh, and Emily, if I find out you told my son anything about this conversation, well, let's just say that the transfer would be the least of your problems." She left without looking back, walking like a ghost toward the plantation. The midday sun was merciless, but she felt cold to the bone. Gabriel. Her brother had died because he asked the wrong questions, because he dreamed too big, because he believed that a humble man still had rights in this world. When she reached the sector where she worked, Ryan was already there, leaning against the tractor, talking to the foreman. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up with that smile that made her heart race, but the expression quickly changed when he noticed her state. "What happened?" he asked, moving away from the foreman and coming toward her. "Nothing," she lied, picking up the hoe and heading for the beds. "Emily, you're pale, and your hands are trembling." She stopped, closed her eyes, took a deep breath. When she opened them again, Ryan was right in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "It was my father, wasn't it? He called you in." The foreman was watching from a distance, certainly instructed to report anything strange. Emily forced a smile. "Just a routine conversation, Dr. Ryan. Nothing important." The formal use of the title made his eyes narrow. She had never called him doctor. "Emily, excuse me," she said, going around him and heading for the garden beds. "I have work to do." But Ryan didn't give up. For the rest of the afternoon, he circled around the sector like a predator, observing her every move, waiting for an opportunity to be alone. When finally the foreman moved away to solve a problem with the irrigation, he approached. "Let's talk. Now." "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is. And you're going to tell me what my father said, or I'm going to him and ask personally." The idea of Ryan confronting his father because of her made Emily feel panic. She didn't know how far the colonel would go to protect his interests, but she was sure he wouldn't hesitate to destroy his own son if necessary. "Don't do that," she said quickly. "Then talk to me." Emily looked around. They were in the middle of the plantation, away from curious ears, protected by the corn stalks that rose high around them. It was dangerous, reckless, exactly the kind of situation the colonel had warned her to avoid. But it was also possibly their last chance to be alone. "I'm leaving," she finally said. "What do you mean, leaving?" "Transfer to Dallas, next week." The impact was immediate. Ryan took a step back as if he had been punched. "That's absurd. You can't be transferred just like that, out of nowhere. There are procedures, there's what your father wants, and he wants me out of here. Because of us." "There is no us," she said, but her voice came out choked. "Of course there is." Ryan moved closer, holding her face between his hands. "There is, Emily. There has been since the first day, and you know it." His touch burned like fire. Emily closed her eyes, allowing herself for a moment to feel the rough texture of his hands against her skin, the heat radiating from his body, the masculine scent that made her lose her reason. "There can't be," she whispered. "You're going to marry Hannah Morgan in December." Ryan froze. "How do you know that?" "Your father told me. Said it's a marriage that will consolidate the family business for generations." "My father said that." The anger in his voice was palpable. Emily opened her eyes and saw a cold fury taking over Ryan's expression, a determination she had never seen before. "Ryan, no." "That son of a bitch," he murmured. "That damn son of a bitch decided my life without even consulting me." "You didn't know?" "Of course I didn't know." He released her face, beginning to pace back and forth like a caged lion. "I knew he wanted me to marry someone suitable, but I thought I had time, thought I could choose when and with whom." Emily felt a pang of hope, dangerous and foolish. "But now you know, and you can't do anything to change it." "Can't I?" He stopped pacing and fixed his eyes on hers. "I'm a grown man, Emily. I can choose who I marry. Not if your father decides to disinherit you. Not if he decides to make your family's life a living hell. Not if... If what? She almost told him about Gabriel, almost revealed the veiled threat the colonel had made. But then she remembered the warning. If she told anything, the transfer would be the least of her problems. "If he decides to destroy me," she said instead. "And my parents too." Ryan approached again, and this time there was something different in his eyes, an intensity that made her stomach contract with desire and fear at the same time. "Then we'll run away." "What?" "You heard me. We'll run away from here. We'll go far away, start over somewhere else. I have money saved, contacts in other cities. We can..." "Ryan, stop." Emily put her hands on his chest, trying to keep him at a distance but feeling the rigid muscles under his shirt. "This is madness." "Is it?" He covered her hands with his, pressing them against his racing heart. "Crazier than spending the rest of my life pretending I don't feel what I feel? Crazier than marrying a woman I don't love while you go away forever? You barely know me. I've known you for 3 months. I watch you every day, listen to your voice, see how you treat people, how you face difficulties, how you smile even when you're sad. I know you're strong, intelligent, loyal, and that when you get angry, your eyes get darker. I know you have a small scar on your left wrist and that you always bite your lower lip when you're concentrating. And I know that every time our eyes meet, you feel the same thing I feel." It was true. Every word was absolutely true. "And what do you feel?" she asked, her voice barely coming out. "That I'd rather die than live without you." The confession hung in the air between them like a promise and a condemnation. Emily knew she should step away, should say this was impossible, that they came from different worlds, and that love wasn't enough to overcome everything. But when Ryan bent his head and their lips met, all rationality disappeared. The kiss was different from anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just desire, it was desperation. It was a primitive need to connect with another person at the deepest possible level. His hands went up to her hair, undoing the simple bun, and when the strands fell over her shoulders, he moaned against her lips as if that were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Emily," he murmured, kissing her neck, moving down toward her collarbone. "Don't go away. Please." "I have to," she said, but her own hands were exploring his back, feeling the tense musculature under his shirt. "If I stay, he'll destroy us. Let him try." You don't understand. He's capable of things you can't even imagine. Ryan pulled back enough to look into her eyes. What did he do? For a moment, Emily almost told him everything. Almost talked about Gabriel, about the threats, about the fear that was eating her inside. But then she heard footsteps approaching, familiar voices, and pushed Ryan away forcefully. Someone's coming. They separated quickly, Emily pretending to examine the corn plants, while Ryan simulated checking the soil quality. When the foreman appeared between the rows, accompanied by 2 other workers, the scene seemed perfectly innocent. But the damage was already done. That night, when Emily arrived home, she found an envelope under the door. Inside, a single photo, her and Ryan kissing in the middle of the plantation, taken from afar but with enough quality to leave no doubt about what was happening. On the back, a handwritten message. The transfer has been canceled. You have 24 hours to leave town. If you're still here after that, this photo will end up in the hands of people who can make your life a living hell. And don't forget, accidents happen. Emily sat on the bed holding the photo with trembling hands. The colonel wasn't joking. He never was. And now she had an impossible choice. Leave forever or risk not just her own life, but that of everyone she loved. Outside, the wind shook the eucalyptus trees, and in the distance she could swear she heard the sound of a car approaching on the dirt road. The car stopped in front of the small brick house where Emily lived with her parents, the engine still rumbling softly in the silent dawn. She immediately recognized the silver pickup truck. It was Ryan's. Through the living room curtain, she saw him jump out of the vehicle with tense, furious movements and walk to the front door. When the knock sounded, strong and insistent, her heart raced. "Emily, open this door." "I know you're in there." His voice was different, loaded with an anger she had never heard before. Emily looked at the hallway. Her parents had woken up. She could hear worried whispers coming from their room. She needed to make Ryan leave before the situation got even worse. She opened the door just a crack, placing her body as a barrier. "You can't be here," she whispered. "It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" He pushed the door forcefully, entering without being invited. "You want to know what's dangerous? Dangerous is finding out my father is blackmailing you. Dangerous is discovering he has men following our every step." Emily felt her blood freeze. How had he found out? "What are you talking about?" Ryan took an envelope identical to the one she had received from his pocket and threw it on the kitchen table. The same photo of them kissing, the same threat written on the back. "He sent this to me too," said Ryan, his voice rough with anger. "He thought if he showed me the photo, I would be disgusted, ashamed, that I would dismiss you myself to preserve the family's reputation. And won't you?" she asked, raising her chin in a defiant gesture that hid her fear. Ryan approached slowly, his eyes fixed on hers, a dangerous intensity emanating from every tense muscle of his body. "You still don't understand who I am, do you?" His voice descended to a hoarse whisper. "I don't care who sees us. I don't care what they think. And I definitely don't care what my father wants." "You should care." Emily backed up until her back hit the kitchen wall. "He's capable of terrible things, Ryan. Things you can't even imagine. Like what happened to your brother." The words fell like a bomb. Emily widened her eyes, her mouth opening in an O of shock. "How did you—" "I did some investigating on my own," he said, placing his hands on the wall on either side of her head, cornering her. "I talked to people, went through old papers. Gabriel didn't die in an accident, did he? He was killed because he discovered something." Tears began to stream down Emily's face. The truth, kept like poison inside her for so long, was finally being exposed. "He discovered about the lands," she whispered. "Small producers who lost their properties through forged debts, falsified documents. Your father has had a scheme for years, taking land from humble people for a fraction of the real value. And when Gabriel wanted to report it, an accident happened. A tractor that lost its brakes right when he was passing by. What a coincidence, isn't it?" Ryan closed his eyes, his jaw contracting. When he opened them again, there was a fierce determination inside. "We're going to end this." "We?" Emily shook her head. "There is no we, Ryan. I'm leaving tonight. And you're going to marry Hannah Morgan in December, as your father planned." "I won't." "Yes, you will. Because if you don't, he'll kill more people. And I can't carry that weight on my conscience." Ryan held her face between his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Listen carefully to what I'm going to say, Emily Sanders. I'm not going to let you leave. I'm not going to marry a woman I don't love. And I'm not going to let my father continue destroying lives with impunity. And how do you plan to prevent all that? Her voice came out choked with tears. He has money, power, contacts. He can make anything look like an accident. Because I have something he doesn't. What? Evidence. Ryan moved away from her enough to take a flash drive from his pocket. Gabriel was smarter than my father imagined. Before he died, he managed to copy several documents. Fraudulent contracts, records of payments to authorities, even recordings of compromising conversations. It's all here. Emily looked at the small object as if it were a venomous snake. Where did you get that? At your parents' house. Gabriel hid it in a cookie tin in the pantry. Left a note saying that if anything happened to him, to look there. You searched my parents' house? I talked to your mother this morning. I told her I suspected Gabriel's death wasn't accidental. She cried, but she took me to the hiding place, said she had been waiting for someone to show up, that Gabriel had told her if something happened to him, someone would come looking for the truth. Emily let herself slide down the wall until she sat on the floor, her legs without strength. The revelation was too much to process. My mother knew. She suspected, just like you. But you were both too afraid to act. And you're not? Ryan knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. I'm terrified, he admitted. But I'm more afraid of losing you than facing my father. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Mrs. Cecilia appeared at the kitchen entrance, wearing an old robe over her nightgown, her gray hair disheveled from sleep. But her eyes were alert, determined. Ryan, she said, with a firmness in her voice that surprised Emily. Did you find it? I found it, Mrs. Cecilia. It's all here. Mom. Emily stood up quickly. What's happening? What should have happened 3 months ago, daughter? Justice for your brother. Mrs. Cecilia approached and took the flash drive from Ryan's hands, observing it as one who holds the future between their fingers. Gabriel made me promise that if he died, I would find a way to expose the truth. I just didn't know how. Until you showed up here this morning, son. You're crazy, said Emily, running her hands through her hair. You don't know what the Colonel is capable of. He'll kill all of us. Maybe, agreed Mrs. Cecilia. Or maybe it's time to show him that humble people also know how to fight when necessary. Ryan stood up and extended his hand to Emily. Come with me. Where? To end this once and for all. Ryan, no, it's suicide. It's liberation, he corrected. For both of us. Emily looked at her mother, who nodded her head, then at Ryan, who was watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. She knew that if she went with him, there would be no turning back. It would be a declaration of war against the most powerful man in the region. If I go, and we die, will you regret it? If you don't come, and we spend the rest of our lives apart, I'll die of regret anyway. It was madness. It was dangerous. It was probably the worst decision she could make. All right, she said, taking his hand. Let's end this. The journey to Sunny Hill Ranch was made in tense silence. Ryan drove at a controlled speed, his fingers tight on the wheel, while Emily watched the familiar landscape passing by the window. Maybe it was the last time she saw these lands. The flash drive was kept in the pocket of his shirt, a small bomb capable of destroying an empire. Where exactly are we going? She asked when they approached the main entrance of the ranch. To the house. We're going to wake up my father and have a civilized conversation. Civilized? Or not, he admitted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Depends on how he reacts. The main house was dark, imposing against the starry sky. Ryan parked right in front of the main door, without worrying about being quiet. When they got out of the car, Emily could feel the gaze of guards hidden in the darkness. The Colonel always had men on guard, especially at night. There's still time to change your mind, said Ryan, stopping with his hand on the door handle. No, there isn't, she replied. Not anymore. They entered the house like owners. Ryan turned on the lights in the main room, then the kitchen, then the hallway, making enough noise to wake the dead. In a few minutes, they heard heavy footsteps coming down the main staircase. Colonel Davidson appeared at the top of the staircase wearing a silk robe over his pajamas, his hair disheveled, but his eyes already completely alert. When he saw Emily next to his son, his expression hardened. Ryan, what does this mean? It means it's time for us to have an honest conversation, Father. The colonel descended slowly, each step calculated, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. An honest conversation, he repeated, at 3 in the morning, with an employee who should be on her way to Dallas. About that, Father. Change of plans. There was no change of plans. The colonel reached the foot of the stairs, imposing and threatening. There was disobedience, and disobedience has consequences. Ryan took the flash drive from his pocket and placed it on the center table of the room. What kind of consequences? Like the ones Gabriel Sanders suffered? The silence that followed was deafening. The colonel observed the small object on the table as if it were a snake about to strike. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. Ryan approached his father, and Emily could see they were the same height, the same physical build. But there was a crucial difference. Ryan had the strength of youth and righteous anger. You know about the stolen lands, about the falsified documents, about the convenient accidents that happen when someone asks too many questions. You don't know what you're saying, boy. I'm not a boy, Father, and I know exactly what I'm saying. The colonel shifted his gaze to Emily, and there was a coldness there that made her shudder. You, he said, this is your revenge? Seducing my son, filling his head with lies about your brother? My brother didn't die in an accident, said Emily, finding courage she didn't know she had. And you know that. Accidents happen, not when they're planned. The tension in the air was palpable. The three measured each other like adversaries, each waiting for the other's move. Ryan, the colonel finally said, his voice dangerously calm. You're making a mistake that will cost dearly. For you and for her. The only thing that will cost dearly is you continuing to think you can control my life. I can and will control your life as long as you carry my name and live off my inheritance. Then maybe it's time to give up both. The slap came quick and hard, the sound echoing through the large room. Emily screamed, but Ryan didn't move. He just stared at his father, a red mark forming on his face, his eyes burning with fury. You hit me for the last time, he said, his voice low and dangerous. And you're going to marry Hannah Morgan in December, or I guarantee that this tramp and her family will find out what happens to those who defy me. It was the last straw. Ryan charged at his father with the force of a bull, and the two went to the floor in the middle of the room, rolling between the expensive furniture, exchanging punches and kicks in a primitive fight that exposed decades of accumulated resentments. Emily tried to separate them, but received an accidental elbow that sent her against the wall. When she managed to recover, she saw Ryan on top of his father, his hands holding the collar of the robe, his eyes bloodshot. You killed Gabriel Sanders, he shouted. Admit it. I don't need to admit anything, gasped the colonel. And you can't prove anything. Yes, I can. Ryan tightened the fabric more. It's all on that flash drive. Recordings, documents, enough evidence to put you in jail for the rest of your life. The colonel looked at the object on the table, then back at his son. Even if that were true, you would never have the courage to use it. Because you know what would happen to her. He turned his eyes toward Emily. And to her parents. Try testing me. The voice that came from the door froze them. Emily turned and saw Mrs. Cecilia entering the room, accompanied by her father, John, and 3 more men she recognized as ranch workers, all armed. What are you doing here? Asked the colonel, still on the floor. What we should have done a long time ago, answered John, his voice firm despite his age. Defending ourselves from a tyrant. Mrs. Cecilia approached the table and picked up the flash drive. While you were fighting here, we made several copies, she said. One went to the federal police in Houston, another to the district attorney, and a third to that journalist from New York who's been investigating irregularities in rural lands. The colonel's face lost all color. You don't know what you've done. Yes, we do, said Ryan, standing up and extending his hand to help his father. We've done justice. The colonel didn't accept the help, getting up by himself and smoothing his wrinkled robe. You think this will finish me? I have resources, lawyers, contacts. In a week, all of you will be dead or wishing you were. Maybe, agreed Mrs. Cecilia. But at least Gabriel will be able to rest in peace. And will be able to live free, added Emily, approaching Ryan and intertwining her fingers with his. The colonel observed the gesture with disgust. Free? You think you'll be free? You'll spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders waiting for revenge. Because it will come, girl. You can be sure it will come. Ryan pulled Emily closer, wrapping his arm around her in a possessive protection. Let it come, he said. We'll face it together. Together? The colonel laughed, a bitter sound without humor. You think love will be enough? When hunger tightens, when resources run out, when you discover that fighting the system is harder than you imagined? We'll figure it out, answered Emily, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. And Hannah? Asked the colonel to his son. What will I tell the Morgans? Tell them your son preferred to choose for himself. The colonel looked around the room, at the armed men, at the daughter-in-law he had rejected, at the son he had lost. When his eyes returned to Emily, there was something different there. No longer contempt, but a kind of reluctant respect. You succeeded, he finally said. You managed to take my son from me. I didn't take anyone from anyone, she replied. He chose. He did choose, confirmed Ryan, and I don't regret it. From outside, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension of the moment. The federal police had arrived. The colonel straightened his shoulders, recovering part of his haughty posture. This isn't over, he said, looking specifically at Emily. You may have won today, but I still have cards up my sleeve. When the police entered the house, they found a curious scene. One of the most powerful men in agribusiness being confronted by his own son, a humble woman who had become the center of a revolution, and a group of rural workers who had decided to no longer accept being trampled on. As they took the handcuffed colonel away, he shouted over his shoulder, "Ryan, you're still my son. Don't forget that." But Ryan didn't answer. He just held Emily against his chest and whispered in her ear, "Now we're free." She wanted to believe it. She really did. But something told her that freedom had a price, and they still didn't know what it would be. 3 months after Colonel Davidson's arrest, Emily woke up to the smell of fresh coffee invading the small bedroom of the apartment she shared with Ryan in Houston. She had moved to the capital after receiving death threats from henchmen still loyal to the colonel. And Ryan had done the same thing, not out of fear, but because he wanted to start over far from his father's blood-built empire. She found him in the tiny kitchen, shirtless, the muscles of his back tensed as he stirred eggs in an old frying pan. In 3 months he had completely changed. His hair, once always perfectly combed, was now longer, disheveled, with some strands falling over his eyes. His skin was more tanned, a consequence of the manual labor he had needed to accept to survive. His hands, which were once soft, now had real calluses. "Good morning," she murmured, hugging him from behind and kissing his sweaty neck. "Good morning, love." He turned in her arms, returning the embrace. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than yesterday," she lied. The nights were still difficult. Nightmares with Gabriel, with the colonel, with hooded men invading her dreams. But it was getting better. "I got a job," said Ryan, serving the scrambled eggs on 2 uneven plates. "Where?" "At a cooperative of organic producers. I'll be a field supervisor. The salary isn't much, but it's honest," she completed, smiling. "That's what matters." They sat at the small table they had bought at a second-hand store, and Emily observed how simple life had transformed Ryan into someone completely different. There was a lightness to him now, a peace she had never seen when he was still the heir to the Davidsons. "I have news too," she said. "Good or bad?" "Good, I think. They called me to work in the legal department of the landless workers movement. I'll be helping families like ours recover lands that were stolen." Ryan stopped eating, his eyes lighting up. "Emily, that's incredible. It's exactly what you always wanted to do." It was true. In the last few months, while Ryan discovered who he was without his family's name and money, Emily had discovered a vocation she never knew she had. Helping the lawyer who handled the colonel's case had awakened in her a passion for justice that went far beyond personal revenge. "I'll have to study at night, take a paralegal technical course. It won't be easy." "Nothing worth having is easy," he said, holding her hand on the table. "And I'll be by your side every step of the way." The moment was interrupted by knocks on the door. Strong, insistent, with a rhythm that made both their blood freeze. It was too early for a social visit, and they weren't expecting anyone. Ryan got up slowly, signaling Emily to stay where she was. There was a baseball bat next to the door, a precaution they had taken after the threats. When he looked through the peephole, his expression hardened. "Who is it?" whispered Emily. Hannah Morgan, the ex-fiancée. Emily felt her stomach contract. Hannah was everything she wasn't. Sophisticated, educated, rich, beautiful in a way that appeared in magazines. What would a woman like her be doing here? Ryan opened the door, but not completely, keeping his body as a barrier. Hannah, what do you want? To talk, she said, her voice cold but controlled. 5 minutes. We have nothing to talk about. Yes, we do. Hannah pushed the door gently but with determination. About your father, and about the future of you two. Emily stood up, instinctively positioning herself next to Ryan. Hannah studied her from head to toe, a clinical examination that seemed to catalog every defect, every sign of poverty, every proof that she didn't belong to the same world as them. So you're her, Hannah finally said. The woman for whom Ryan threw everything away. I didn't throw anything away, Ryan replied. I chose what was real. Real? Hannah laughed, a sound without humor. You chose poverty, isolation, a life of constant struggle. For her. For love, corrected Emily, finding her voice. Something you two would never have together. Hannah stared at her with an expression that mixed contempt and curiosity. Love, how romantic. And when the money he had saved runs out? When the bills really start to pinch? When you get pregnant and need resources you don't have? We'll manage, answered Emily, but she could feel Ryan tense beside her. Manage? Hannah opened her expensive purse and took out a thick envelope. Or accept help from those who can offer it. We don't want your money, Ryan said quickly. It's not my money. Hannah placed the envelope on the table. It's yours. Mine. Your inheritance. Or at least part of it. Your father may be a criminal, but he's still your father. And even in prison, he still has legal properties, clean investments, money that is legally yours. Emily looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Why are you doing this? Hannah took a while to answer, walking to the small window that overlooked the inner courtyard of the building. Because I love Ryan, she finally said. I always have. And if he can't be happy with me, at least I want him to be happy, even if it's with you. The confession hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Emily felt a pang of something that could be pity, or admiration, or guilt. Hannah, Ryan began. No, she interrupted, turning around. Let me speak. You two are young, in love. Think that love conquers all. But I'm 28, Ryan. I've already seen what happens when passion cools and only reality remains. I've seen couples destroy themselves for lack of money. I've seen women like her, she pointed to Emily, become bitter when they discover that love doesn't pay rent. We're different, said Emily. Are you? Hannah came closer again. Then tell me, what will you do when she gets pregnant? When you need health insurance, education for your children, a real house instead of this. She looked around with disdain. Apartment? Emily felt her cheeks heat up. The apartment was small, simple, with old furniture and appliances that worked by miracle. But it was theirs. It was honest. We'll find a way, she repeated, but her voice came out less convinced. With what money? Hannah opened the envelope and spread papers on the table. Ryan earns $800 a month at the cooperative. You'll earn $1,200 as a paralegal if you get the job. $2,000 a month for 2 adults. And when children come? The numbers were brutal, realistic, impossible to ignore. Emily looked at Ryan and saw that he was also doing the mental calculations. This money, Hannah tapped on the envelope, is $400,000. The part of the inheritance you're entitled to, regardless of your father's crimes. Clean money, obtained before he started stealing land. It's enough for you to buy a house, set up a business, have a decent life. And what's the price? Asked Emily, suspicious. There is no price, answered Hannah. It's a wedding gift. Wedding? Ryan frowned. You are getting married, aren't you? Hannah smiled for the first time since arriving. Or was all this drama just for a passing adventure? Emily looked at Ryan, who blushed to the roots of his hair. They had never talked about marriage. They had been so busy surviving, building a new life, that the future remained a vague and distant idea. Ryan began. You haven't talked about it yet. Hannah shook her head. Typical of a man. Destroys his whole life for a woman but doesn't think about putting a ring on her finger. Hannah, stop, said Ryan, clearly embarrassed. Stop, nothing. She addressed Emily directly. Do you want to marry him? The direct question caught Emily off guard. Of course she wanted to. She had wanted to since the first kiss, since the first night they spent together, since he chose to confront his own father for her. But there was something terrifying about admitting it out loud, making official something that still seemed too fragile to be real. She looked at Ryan, seeking support. Emily, he said, approaching and taking her hands. Do you want to marry me? Her heart raced. There it was, in the middle of the small kitchen, with an ex-fiancé watching, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the proposal she didn't even know she was waiting for. Yes, she whispered. I do. Ryan smiled, that smile that made her stomach do somersaults, and kissed her right there in front of Hannah, not caring about the audience. When they separated, Hannah was smiling too. There, she said. Now you can take the money with a clear conscience. Why are you really doing this? Insisted Emily. Hannah sighed, suddenly looking older. Because my father is doing exactly what Ryan's father did. Taking lands, buying politicians, stepping on humble people. And I'm tired of pretending I don't see, that I don't know. You two, what you did, it was brave. And maybe, if I help you be happy, I can sleep a little better at night. It was the most honest answer Hannah had given since arriving. Emily looked at her with new eyes, seeing no longer the perfect rival, but a woman trapped in a golden cage, trying to find a way to do the right thing. Thank you, Emily finally said. Don't thank me yet, Hannah replied, picking up her purse. Use this money wisely. Build something good, something that honors your brother's memory. When Hannah left, the apartment fell silent. Emily and Ryan looked at the envelope on the table as if it were an alien object. And now? She asked. Now, he said, pulling her into another embrace. We do what she said. We build something good. 2 years later, Emily was standing in the middle of a verdant field, observing the first tomato seedlings sprouting from the red earth. The farm was small, only 50 acres, but it was theirs. Completely theirs. Ryan approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her and placing his hands on her rounded belly. How are you two today? He whispered in her ear. Good, answered Emily, covering his hands with hers. Gabriella is quiet today. Gabriella. They had decided to give her dead brother's name to their daughter, a way to honor his memory and ensure that his fight would not be forgotten. Your father called this morning, said Ryan. And? The credit cooperative approved the loan for the Olivers. They're going to be able to recover the land they lost to my father's henchmen. Emily smiled. The small NGO they had created with Hannah's money was working. They helped rural families recover stolen lands, offered free legal advice and microcredit to small producers. It was little, but it was a beginning. And your father's hearing? Ryan's face hardened. The colonel had been sentenced to 15 years in prison, but he was still trying appeals, still believed that money and contacts could save him. They denied the appeal. He's staying in prison. How do you feel about that? Ryan took a while to answer, observing the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. Relieved, he finally said, and sad. He's still my father, as much of a monster as he is, but relieved. They walked back to the house, small, simple, but cozy, with a porch where they had coffee every morning. Mrs. Cecilia was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, humming softly, while seasoning a chicken. She had moved close to them after her husband died, and now she helped take care of the property and was preparing to be a grandmother. How was your day? She asked when she saw them coming. Productive, answered Emily, sitting heavily in a chair. The pregnancy was in its 7th month, and her body was beginning to feel the weight. Hannah called, said Mrs. Cecilia, serving cold passion fruit juice. Said she's coming for the wedding anyway. It was true. After 2 years of dating and a lot of hard work, they had finally decided to make the union official. It would be a simple ceremony in the town church, followed by a party in the parish hall. Nothing luxurious, but full of love and surrounded by the people who really mattered. She didn't have to, said Ryan. Yes, she did, corrected Emily. She's part of our story. And besides, I like her now. Who would have thought? It was true. Hannah had become an unlikely friend, visiting them a few times a year, always bringing gifts for her future goddaughter and updates on the family business. She had even begun to reformulate her father's company practices, trying to repair some of the damage caused over the years. That night, after Mrs. Cecilia went to sleep, Emily and Ryan sat on the porch, watching the stars. The silence of the countryside was therapeutic after so many months in the city. "Do you regret it?" she asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Regret what?" "Everything. The fight with your father, losing the inheritance, choosing this life instead of the one you could have had." Ryan was silent for so long that she thought he had fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion. "Emily, before I met you, I was dead inside. Rich, but dead. I had everything money could buy, but I had no purpose, no passion, no real life. You saved me. This life, this simplicity, this love, it's more than I ever dreamed I deserved." She turned in his arms to look him in the eyes. "And you showed me that I could be more than a foreman's daughter, that I could fight, that I could win, that I deserved to be completely loved." They kissed there, under the stars, with the promise of a lifetime ahead. It wouldn't be easy. It never had been. There were still bills to pay, dreams to fulfill, a daughter to raise. But they had something that money couldn't buy, a love built in adversity, tempered by struggle, and strengthened by the daily choice to remain together. On their wedding day, 3 weeks later, Emily walked toward the altar wearing a simple white cotton dress, carrying a bouquet of wild flowers she had picked herself. Ryan was there, waiting, in a borrowed suit and a smile that lit up the entire church. When the priest asked if she accepted Ryan as her husband, to love him in wealth and in poverty, in sickness and in health, Emily looked into the eyes of the man who had chosen to fight against the world for her, and answered with a certainty that came from the depths of her soul, "I do, today, tomorrow, and always." And when they kissed, sealing the union that had begun in tragedy and transformed into a love story, Emily knew that her brother Gabriel would be proud. They had won. Not just the corrupt system, not just the social differences, but all the forces that tried to separate them. Now they were a family. Ryan, Emily, and little Gabriella growing in her womb, surrounded by Mrs. Cecilia's love and protected by the land that was truly theirs. They had built an empire different from anything Colonel Davidson ever imagined, an empire of love, justice, and simplicity that no force in the world would be able to destroy. And they lived, not as in fairy tales, but as real people who chose love above all and fought every day to deserve the happiness they had conquered.